Hi, I'm Sarah and I'm in your Monday morning class.
Hi, I'm Richelle. I'm in the Wednesday night class.
And I'm Lacey, and I'm in the Friday class.
And we will be discussing assessment. I guess my assessment journey started out as thinking that clear assessment and clear evaluation was based off of grades and set standards, like standardized tests, that sort of thing. But throughout the course of the semester, I came to realize that the whole not yet idea is more suited to my style of teaching, learning, and I guess assessing and evaluating.
I guess for assessment, I didn't understand why standardized testing was still so popular, but after actually having to apply or make your own rubrics or anything like that or do your own assessment, I can totally see why people stick with the whole multiple choice true false thing, because it is a lot harder to develop authentic assessment that shows learning rather than just if you can repeat something you learned it. So
Yeah, that's true. I think my assessment idea coming into the class was kind of what you were saying, just having like a final grade, and that's just where you were. But as I've come to take this class and learn some things, I think that assessment is like an ongoing, it's a progress, not like a finale. Right?
yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay.
How do you feel about the success criteria over rubric then? Like, do you feel like it's more open-ended when you get a success criteria over a rubric?
That's a good question. I personally respond well to both. I like being told what to do, however, especially in university classes. But with my own students, I would like to open up a more creative aspect or dialogue between us anyway. Just if they have a better idea or something they can do individually to show their learning, I would be open to that, even if it wasn't on the criteria or success criteria, as long as they're hitting like certain points.
Right.
Actually, yeah, I don't know. I gotta think about that more. Good question.
It's a tough one. Yeah.
I think my idea of the whole success criteria versus rubrics versus just giving out grades willy-nilly, I definitely think that success criteria and rubrics give students that ability to demonstrate what they know, but still have that guidance of the teacher. But success criteria is not necessarily my favorite, just because there's so much gap between what the teacher wants or expects and what the students deliver. So if the students don't deliver 100%, how does the teacher take away marks or give marks based off of one-lined criteria? So that's where rubrics, I think, especially for lower grades or even into high school, that the rubric allows for students to say, no, I'm definitely at a 3 or I'm definitely at a 4 instead of, oh, I got a 75 and I don't know why.
With rubrics, what do you guys think of the co-creating?
Love it.
Yeah. Did you try it with your students?
Actually, I didn't try it with my students, just solely based on the fact that my cooperating teacher wanted me to stay on a very strict schedule. He didn't want our students to fall behind, like even by a day, like everything had to be done by the time I was gone. But doing the readings, building that success criteria with students or rubrics with students, like I think Louis Vellante talked about like a new approach to assessment that's student-centered, and I definitely think giving students that agency in their own learning is bringing that student-centeredness into the classroom.
Yeah, I agree, and I think the students should have more say in their own education. But when you hear about it, say in Carmen's class, remember she talked about last semester she talked about developing the rubric with her class, and then she said she realized halfway through that they were just doing it to kill time. So were they, I don't know if it's like a classroom culture that you have to create, or students aren't used to having this responsibility, right? They're not often asked to be engaged in their own assessment, or maybe slowly it's shifting. So maybe they don't know how to take it seriously, but she kind of said like by halfway through she realized that they're not really participating. So it kind of seems like, it seems a little scary, like is it just wasting time? And even when we did success criteria for a video in this class, it felt like it was like pulling teeth. But again, is that just because we're not used to being a part of our own assessment?
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
could very well be. I don't know. But
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I cut
no,
you
that's
off.
not. No, I'm sorry.
The one thing I noticed or we discussed in class was that rubrics, they're not always great because they can't stand in for feedback and they don't teach kids to be creative. It tells them too specific of instructions that they are just following the rules and they're not thinking outside the box. They're not being creative at all with their assignments and how they are assessed. So I thought that was interesting.
So they're still using rubrics they figured out how to use the rubric to get a good grade, the rubric isn't necessarily extending their learning.
Right.
They're just learning how to get the grade according to the assessment.
Exactly.
And that's, I guess, for most of us here, I think that's not our goal as educators. We want them to develop those critical literacies and push beyond those boundaries. But then we set boundaries on it. Yeah, it's tricky. I don't know.
It is tricky, but then how do you not set any boundary at all?
Well, and we talked about that in actually our Monday class, as well as in other classes, about that like amalgamation of strategies. So we talked about like that success criteria and the first couple boxes of a rubric. So if you're falling short of the perfect success criteria, at least you know where you're falling, but you're not being told exactly what needs to be there, because how boring is that when you have 30 of the exact same project? That's not teaching students anything.
Yeah.
That's replication still.
Right, and it's not student-centered learning in that instance because they're not putting their own passions into what they're doing when everyone has to be the same. But I do think that like there is something to be said about giving students that additional feedback so you've got your rubric and you've got that comment section instead of 1 or 2. Like if they're falling short of that 3-4, you're giving them, okay, not yet. You need to do this, this, and this to get there, to get to where I want you to be. So,
right. One thing I will mention maybe is a way to combat the wasting time by creating your own rubric. We discussed in class having a rubric pretty much completed, but there's a few empty boxes, and that way students can fill in what they think they need to work on.
oh, nice.
So it's like, for example, everything we've done except for the very bottom, there'd be just
2 rows, I think.
there. Is it
Gallagher. I was going to say
Gallagher.
the same thing. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm like, I know.
Individual conference, and then
Right, and then the teacher and the student together would fill out like where do I need to hit, like, as a student for my individual growth. And I thought that was a really cool idea. Yeah.
And then at least it's completely student-centered. Like it is tailored to that student because that is what the student needs.
Right. Exactly. So it's kind of that nice combination of
Perfect.
teacher-led and student-led.
So engaging with the readings, obviously, for me, the Louis Vellante, I hope I'm saying his last name correctly, was an awesome reading that allowed me to look at assessment and assessing of the whole student and not just what they put on pen and paper. Huge for me because I've been a traditional learner. So for me, understanding students who don't thrive in that essay writing or in that standardized testing, I didn't necessarily understand the importance of allowing them the opportunity to express their knowledge in other media. It's one of those things where it's like that was so tailored to me and I didn't even know it.
Right.
So like through this I've been able to see like, oh, well heck, if a student can demonstrate their learning through a song, as in our class we had someone demonstrate it through song, or we demonstrated knowledge through video games, or we demonstrated knowledge through many different avenues, videos, we're doing a video now, then at least like students will be able to be as successful as they possibly can be. Without having that downfall of like, oh, I have anxiety when writing, or I don't like the way I write, or I can't always put my ideas down.
Right.
do you think that's a problem with education in general, that teachers are usually the people who did well in the classroom, so then when they go in, they have those expectations, and if you did well with a certain kind of assessment, then maybe you're kind of more geared towards them?
Absolutely. I definitely think that because, maybe speaking on behalf of myself here, but
Yeah,
I know
absolutely.
Sarah said she was a good student. I know you said you had some struggles in high school,
But that was different.
but-
I was a good student in elementary.
okay, and then you just
I just didn't feel like
teenage
going
years.
to, yeah, I was just being a teenager, but like
Right.
really well in elementary school, absolutely like
Right.
top of the class kind of thing.
I was a pretty studious kid as well. High school, same thing. I was busy chasing boys and playing volleyball and not really focusing. But luckily, my parents were like very strict. And,
But you knew how to be a good student.
but I
if
knew
you were
I knew
there.
how.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had good studying skills. I knew how to take notes. I was a good reader, very strong writer. My report card in grade 3, I was reading in higher level than my brother, who was 6 years older than me. So I always had those like basic like good student skills.
Yeah.
I can also sit in a desk for 8 hours a day, and it's not a big deal. So those types of things worked for me. But then I talked to my husband, who has ADHD, and it's a different ballgame. He skipped tons of school, skipped tons of university. Just luckily, his parents are 2 professors who were willing to like sit with him after school and just go over everything while he was in his comfort zone, as opposed to having to be up at 8 a.m. sitting in a class being attentive, right? So, but who knows how things would have been different for him if he didn't have that support at home, which, I mean, I don't know anybody else who has 2 professors as parents. So there's that.
And that kind of breaks into what we were discussing before when we were talking about what questions we wanted to ask each other today, about like that student engagement. And so for a student, let's say with ADHD, or that has perhaps a different way of learning, do you assess them differently based on what we've learnt in our class?
Nice segue.
Thank you.
That was very good. Well, when we were talking earlier too, like about the blind assessment, because in that one reading, I think it's the 500 tips of assessment. I should have marked it down, but it said to know your students, and therefore you can grade them on knowing them. And we had that discussion already. But then there's the idea of blind assessment and the pros and cons to that too. It's hard to know what to do, because we've all had students where you want to give them a better mark because they applied, but the assessment piece didn't allow them to show what they knew. And how do you do that? You can't change your assessment piece midway through, because then you have to change it for everyone.
But I guess like if it's tailored to students and students in mind, you really shouldn't, well, and I shouldn't say shouldn't, but like you won't run into that problem as often as you may think. Like I remember from being in school, like rubrics were just starting to become a thing where everyone handed out rubrics, and literally every teacher had the same photocopied rubric that they handed out for every single assessment. I was like, awesome, thanks. Like, has 7 adjectives and writes in full sentences. Great. Whereas, like, if it's actually student-centered, the students helped create it, and you are leaving those couple boxes for students to tailor it to their own learning, perhaps you won't have those students where it's like, I need to change this assessment for John because blank.
Do you think too, though, knowing John would make you change your assessment? Like when you're marking and you see the name at the top of the paper or wherever they put it, does that change the way you view that one from the paper you viewed before it?
Yeah.
Yeah. I've had a couple professors who do blind assessment, one English and one in philosophy, and they said they want to do blind assessment because they don't want to be thinking about the student. They're assessing the work and not the person. So it's hard though, because like if you have modified students and things like that, you need to know those things, but does it play into effect, especially if that kid was pissing you off all day and then you get their
Yeah.
test and you're like, you know what, you didn't write in full sentences, so like no.
Well, that's a tough
So,
one, because in that one class we have together, Gallagher's book, that's what I'm referencing here, it talks about putting like the name sheet, like, and the rubric and stuff on the back, so when they hand it in, you're not actually getting their name like on the front page.
Yeah.
So I thought that was interesting, but at the same time, I kind of do want to know who my student is, because I know if they were paying attention or not. For example, my pre-internship, there was a kid there who we watched the movie, a student, I shouldn't say kid. We watched the movie and they had to point out 4 differences in the novel to the movie, and he just made very generic statements, but I know he didn't know what he was talking about, because I know that he was talking and on his phone the entire time. So I didn't have any forgiveness for him not having those answers. Whereas the other student who I know is a little has a little bit of hearing issues. I know that he was trying his best to listen to the movie, and he was frantically writing answers down, I know he was paying attention. I know where he was coming from, what he was getting at, and I had more like patience and forgiveness for this student. Is that fair though?
Yeah, that's the tough part, right? Because you want to be fair and you want to, do you mark the effort? If it's, how do you negotiate those two? I have no idea. Is blind assessment more fair? Because you don't know who it is? So you just stick to what you outline, like, here's what I said I want them to do, can you do it, yes or no? And if it's open-ended, did they try? You could maybe be able to tell. I know it's tough, I don't know.
But I guess that's where like assessment needs to be more than just that pen and paper, and we're getting into like individualized assessments or like holistic assessments, or assessing like the whole student and their whole knowledge and their whole ability. And I don't necessarily think like ability is a good word to use, but like their ability to show what they know. And so like that whole pen and paper, like, oh, I'm getting, let's use John again, John's paper or John's answer sheet, and I either know he tried really hard or no he didn't. But like class discussion, that should be assessed. Or the Jeopardy game that you're using to review for the test, that's assessment. That's like, you know, the kids who are participating or the kids who aren't. You can go up to them afterwards. Like, I had this one teacher who is an older teacher, been teaching for a long time, and a mature teacher, and he pretty much said, like, go up to the students and just like casually quiz them on different things that you're learning about. So if they're in a work period, just be like, hey, John, Egypt is blank, or what river is important in Egypt, and how does that relate to this and that? It's a conversation with the students, but you're assessing them as you go. And I think that should definitely contribute to their grades and to their marks and to their ability, and hopefully someday we move away from this like black and white grades.
But should that be separate assessment then? Like a checklist, you walk around and you're like, okay, they knew the 2 questions that I asked, that's cool? Or is that going to go on to like a final assessment piece?
I think it depends, like your assessment philosophy. So like if your philosophy is that like a traditional philosophy where this paper is worth this and this paper is worth this and this is worth this, then yeah, for sure. But if you're going to that whole, and I think it was a video we watched and a reading we did about the not yet and the almost there and the you got it, or the this is correct but maybe add this type of feedback, students are then more apt to being like, hey, I did really well in discussion today, but I'm really terrible at writing tests. So I'm not worried about the test because I already know that my grade isn't going to be crippled because of my inability or anxiety towards test taking.
I like that actually, because even when I did my pre-internship, we did an exam of my SNN, and when I had to make this test, and my teacher was really adamant that I had multiple choice and matching. So we did a couple of those, and I was like, okay, whatever. We did a couple of short answer, and what was really important to me was an essay question relating back to my sets leading into the lessons every day, which I thought were really great. I really thought about them a lot and made them very student connected, or able for them to make connections too. So I wanted their feedback on that, and in class we had such great discussion. Robert Latimer and euthanasia, for example, and the kids were so heated about it. But when I got the essays back on that part of the final, I was disappointed because I'm like, I gave you an opportunity to just like write exactly what you said to me. I'm not marking you on your formatting and your MLA and all that. I just want to hear I want to hear what your heart is feeling on this topic. And there was clearly issues with putting that pen to paper. So I knew that they know more. I knew they felt more. But I had to give them the grade.
Oh.
Did it change how I graded them? Yeah, it did.
Did you give them less because you knew they knew more?
No.
You gave more.
I gave them more because I knew they knew more.
Okay.
Right.
I could have gone either way. I figured because you're really nice, but I just wanted to double check, because another person might be like, you know what? I know you know better than this, so.
So as we've been talking about our experiences in education, and how that has shaped the way we perceive assessments, or that we adopt like that different pedagogy and those different modes of assessment. Let's talk about like the 21st century and moving into the ways of assessment within our classrooms, especially focusing on the unique situations of today's classrooms, being as they are so diverse and inclusive.
I read in Rosalind Walsh's paper, Rethinking Literacy Education in New Times, Multimodality, Multi-Literacies, and New Literacies. And in that article, I talked a lot about there's been so many new literacies introduced to students recently. So why are we not keeping up with assessments? Like, why do we keep going back to these traditional assessments when we're not teaching traditional literacies? If we're teaching using cell phones and technology, why are we not assessing doing the same? Right, so what do you guys think about that?
I actually find that a lot too. There's a lot of what assessment should be. Like, it should be authentic, it should be reliable, it should be transparent. It's all these things, but when you look into the actual assessment criteria and when they break it down, besides rubrics, I don't find there's a lot of information on how to assess those things. Like, it's what it should be, but it's not how to do it. I find, even in like the class readings or beyond rubrics and success criteria, there's not, I don't know, and it seems hard if you have this open-ended thing. How do you, if you have an assessment piece and you're not leaving it open-ended, it's not, I don't know how else to explain it, but like,
Yeah, I know what you're saying.
we see tons of examples of rubrics, but okay, but what should we do otherwise?
I think the issue with that might be because technology changes so much. Like, if I was to write a book today on how to assess using Flipgrid, by the time it gets published and out there and teachers are reading it and it's used in universities, that's going to be
Flipgrid.
obsolete. Like,
Yeah.
right, who knows if that will even be a thing anymore, right? So
Yeah.
maybe it's because of that, but maybe we're not looking in the right places either.
That's true. Maybe we just don't know the right searching tools, or so used to the one way of doing it that you just fall back on it and hope that you can just tweak it enough to make it more successful for everyone, or more open-ended and not. Yeah.
Well, I think the issue also is that you can't expect every student to have access to technology.
Right.
I'm not sure what school it was at, but yesterday in our presentations, one of our fellow students was talking about how every student in their entire school has a Google Chromebook.
Right.
That they get it when
yeah.
when they sign up for school and they register at the particular school. So for them to have that, then yeah, go for it. But in my classroom that I worked in for pre-internship, there wasn't consistent technology. Some students didn't have phones at all. Some were living in group homes, so they had to leave all their technology at home when they left. We could get the laptop cards, but that wasn't a flawless situation. Lots of times the Wi-Fi wasn't working, or the cards were taken by somebody else, or they weren't plugged in, so they were not charged properly. There's some barriers.
Yeah, and we were all at the same school, so and we were outside of the school, so laptop cards in the high school, and we were in the elementary school. How do you wheel that over? Like, it's not, you have to book the time to go into the school. Now you have to take time to travel, or hope your students are like, okay, next period's in this class. But high school students, you very much, okay, come here, then we'll
Yeah.
go there, and you're eating up time. And there was other people in our classes who said that the Wi-Fi was dodgy too. So yeah, technology, we want to move into the 21st century. I don't know, you were at the same school. Was it pen and paper there?
Actually, I was at the same school, but I was lucky enough to be with the connected ed teacher.
Oh, okay.
So I got a totally different experience because his second period was online ed. So he had access to whatever type of technology that would be able to enhance learning. It was his. If he wanted it, it was his. Because, of course, connected ed, we're moving forward in that 21st century essential skills. And I definitely think, I did a presentation today in another class about how education needs to be relevant to the time. And even though students don't have access to something now, they need those essential skills to move forward. So, like, remember our parents, and even like for us in the earliest years of our education, there was all the typing classes where they would like put the paper over top of the
IP.
Yes.
The
And
mature
that-
students.
I know that one.
And like that,
Typewriter.
that's like that's like essential to what skills that those students will need when they graduate. But when you look at students now, those learning skills will be essential. And I think I was really lucky. Exams, little assessments, everything was online. I did a map project, and you guys remember like taking out the atlas and coloring the map?
Oh yeah.
No, not for these students. It was like, find these coordinates on Google Earth and put it on your map and do this and do that, and like actually go and explore what this region looks like based on Street View or based on,
Wow.
and like those are things that students, like even just the practice of that, are they ever going to need to know what some place in Egypt looks like? Maybe not. But it's just the idea and the practice of using those tools towards education. Because students are using technology, but it's not always towards their benefit, or maybe they don't actually know it's towards their benefit. Like I did that video game project. Students who play video games are more adaptable and they're better actually thinking on their toes.
Right.
And I can see that with a lot of my friends who play video games. Whereas I'm more of a person who has to like think my decisions through like 8 times over. I didn't play video games.
Do you think if you did a project where you had to create a video game, it would help you develop that skill then to be more quicker on your toes rather than sit back and think? Do you think if like you had projects or assignments in your own education that you would develop those skills because you had to do it because you're a good student? So do you see the benefit then in a video game assignment?
I do see the benefit in a video game assignment, but I do also see the benefit in like talking that through with your students, because of course everything has to be student centered. So once things become video game centered or technology centered, it's not really doing the student any good. And that's kind of what I've thought and what I've come to realize through this assessment class is like, if we're doing a video game per se, it needs to fit all the criteria of what we want the students to know, instead of the students just being able to do something to waste, or for them to seemingly think we're wasting time. Like they need to know why we're doing things, and maybe they'd be more interested in doing it. Or maybe the students who are diligent and will do anything just for a grade, and I'm not saying diligent because that's what I think those students are, but like students who will just do anything for a grade, it's not as if they're going to think anything less of video games. Like
Just doing it with conviction.
Right.
Like I'm doing this assignment because it's proving that I know this, not that I'm just going on playing video games.
right.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Or I'm proving that through assessment, through my assessment of them and their assessment of themselves, that I can make decisions, that I can causality, I can weigh out causality, I can weigh out repercussions, a lot of things are simulated through our access to these 21st century tools that I think weren't necessarily available to us back in the day.
I feel like what I'm taking from this though is that we need to be prepared either way. So we may be in a classroom like you or like yourself. So we need to have these like so many skills and knacks and knowledge on so much stuff, which is a lot of work for us also. So I need to know all these apps and how to use laptop carts. And I need to know all these things, which are constantly changing, but I still need to be able to grab my paper and pen when the power goes out.
Yes.
And come up with something as well. So it's definitely challenging.
Slightly off topic, but because we had the same school and same environments, and I saw a couple other classrooms, cell phones in the classroom, are they useful to the 21st century competencies, or do they need to go on in the shoe thing on the door? My teacher let them have it. If they were on it for too long, she addressed it, but if they checked it in 30 seconds and went back to whatever they're supposed to be doing, she's fine. But then other classrooms have it put away. If you're in a connected class, can you use the cell phone? Like, what do cell phones, are they going to help 21st century competencies, or do we need them out of the classroom? I know that's not necessarily assessment, but I'm just curious just because we're here, what do you think? Really quick.
My experience with my pre-internship, the phones were a huge issue. I was sick of fighting with kids about it. I also didn't feel like they took me as seriously as their regular teacher. So maybe it's more of a me and how I addressed it issue, but I did make it very clear that I don't want to see your phones. But by the end of it, there was a few students who were extremely disruptive. So if I saw them on their phone and they're just being quiet and hiding their phones under their desk and minding their own business, you know what? That works for me today, because you're not bugging Sam and Sue and Jake and everyone around you. You're just minding your own business, and that I'd rather that than them disrupt everybody else's learning.
So you wouldn't develop a set that involved them possibly using their cell phones?
Not my particular class, because like I mentioned, I had 2 students who were from group homes who were not allowed to bring their technology out of their house. I'm not sure why those rules are in place, but they weren't allowed to. So I know that if I was to do something that involved a cell phone in particular, that would be difficult. Technology in general, I could get the laptop cart, but having things say like, I don't know, I'm trying to think of
Like a Kahoot.
Or
Medi or what?
Menti.
Menti. Yeah.
But I
Medi.
guess you could like pair
Old
kids
people.
up.
You could pair kids up.
Like I remember
that's
being
true.
in school, and I didn't get social media until I turned 18. I was on no social media avenues. I didn't have a smartphone until I was 18. I had like a flip phone, a phone that could text and call, and that's.
And we're the mature people.
Hey, cell phones weren't even a thing until I was in grade 11.
Yeah. We had like the Nokia Zach Morris phones.
And they were not cool.
Can you hear me now? No.
And it was not, sorry.
But
Nice.
in class, no, it's all good. In class, we were doing a thing, and I remember being in school, and our teacher was like, well, log on to your Facebooks, and we're going to be doing this activity. And it was activity on like digital citizenship.
Digital responsibility.
And I was like, I don't have Facebook. And she was like, what do you mean? I was like, I don't have Facebook. And she was like, is it because you don't want us to see your Facebook, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, no, like, I literally just don't have Facebook. Like, and she was like, oh, so like, that's fine. Like, you can just pair up with someone else. So I paired up with someone else. We went through the activity, and I felt like I learned a lot about digital citizenship, even though I didn't personally have my name tied to a Facebook account.
Right.
I learned a lot about Facebook and about that sort of thing. So I think like even if students don't have access to it, something they're going to need to know. So in whatever way, shape, or form you can get your lesson across, I think it's a good thing. Like my grade 9s could have their phones. My grade 10s could not have their phones. Because my grade 9s, there was a couple times at the beginning, I was like, no phones, I don't want to see them, put them in the mouse house, that's like our shoe area.
So cute.
And that's what our teacher called it. And so that's what I adopted when I went to my pre-internship class. And there's this one girl, and that's a lesson we didn't have the laptops. She was like, can I grab my phone? I don't actually understand what these words mean. So I'm like, oh, perhaps there's like an ESL, EAL type of thing. And so I was like, sure. There was a couple EAL students, a couple modified students, a couple students who just wanted like reaffirmation, but they didn't want to necessarily like out themselves by being like, excuse me, what does community mean? Or what does this mean? And they were using it to look up definitions to, like some students, we were doing a review and this one kid was like, who's King Louis the 16th? Well, did you look at your notes? I wasn't there that day. All right, do you want to pair up with someone? No, I don't really want to pair up with someone. It's like, do you want to Google it? Googled it, learned about it, we talked about it. So like, I definitely think that it depends on your students.
It's a $130 shot at Earl's, don't you know?
And how do we assess it? It's delicious.
And I think like,
how do we assess
talking
cell
about
phones
that,
in the classroom?
how do we assess cell phones? I definitely think it's like, that is not it's a tool. It's not an assessment method. But if you want to use it as a tool for assessment.
That's a good point, actually. Because even you were saying that.
For learning.
Yeah.
Like Kahoots and stuff, do they know what we're talking about? So you could do a Kahoot.
Yeah.
And it's an assessment, okay, this is, I can see where they're falling short. And it's easy because they don't have to actually identify themselves. So you can do a group thing, see everyone and kind of have a group picture. So I guess I guess you could use a cell phone as a tool for assessment,
Well,
not of or anything.
Even like definitions, when you're saying that, in my head, I'm like, well, how many dictionaries in a school? But then you say EAL, I'm like, okay, well, Google Translate is not, you can't get that same effect from from Webster. You know?
And it's so much quicker to let them do it on their cell phones.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh my
So-
God. I was in a French immersion classroom and I was shocked. There was one dictionary and one Becherel. And I'm like sitting there and that's like how to conjugate verbs.
Don't even know what that one is.
It's like a verb dictionary.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
And so if one student had it, the others had to wait. Well, that's a wasting time, so then they start talking with their friends. And when they start talking with their friends, they forget that they had something to look up. And when that dictionary is actually free, they're talking about their weekends when they should be looking up the word.
Right.
So what I found was it's like, Google, Google, Google. And students would like get into the habit of just Google.
So we need to teach more responsible cell phone use?
Yes.
I think we'd live with that.
Yeah. And I guess to be fair, I'm not giving my cell phone away. I'm on my phone all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Even in school, I'm like, oh, someone's texting or whatever, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I'm still paying attention. Maybe not as good as I could or should, but I still do okay, you know? So
The one other thing I wanted to say about the 21st century competencies and then traditional forms of assessment is this new, well, it's new to me, maybe you can speak to it, but the whole idea of self-assessment. We're like asked to reflect a lot, but self-assessment, I don't remember doing that in high school. We went to the same high school, but do you remember? I wasn't in high school a whole heck of a lot, but even when I upgraded my grade 12, this traditional forms of assessment, self and peer assessment were never a thing. They never asked you how you felt about your own work.
this is interesting you say this because I was reading
Indeed.
through the 1991 edition of the Saskatchewan Evaluation, a teacher's handbook that is on your courses for 410, and they talked a lot about self-assessment, which I thought was very interesting because in 91 I would have been going into kindergarten, so technically I should have been very familiar with self-assessment
Right.
my entire elementary and secondary years, but I never did it once that I can recall. What about you? You're a bit younger.
We had one teacher who was really great at self-assessment. My schooling was a little bit different just because elementary I went to a private school that turned into a separate school, francophone school, and then for my last years of high school I went to a split school that was between French immersion and Anglophone learning, and it was also a connected ed school. And small towns, you kind of have to Mod Podge everything, especially in the community I grew up in, because it was extremely diverse. Like, we have our own mosaic every year. Like, it's crazy. So for the self-assessment part, our teachers used it more so as like either diagnostic or formative. And it was very much like, I say this theme, fist of 5 on how you understand it, or on like 5 means I could teach someone else, and 0 means I know nothing, and anything in between is relevant as well. We also did a lot of like checklist self-assessments. So it's like, did I get this? Yeah, all formative. Like in my assignment, did I put a title page? Yes. Did I put this? Yes. Did I put that? Did I put effort? Yes. It wasn't necessarily what we're doing at university, co-constructing these success criteria, rubric, and all that sort of thing, taking that in, showing it to peers, reviewing it yourself. Like, it wasn't built like that.
Right. That's interesting because I don't even consider a checklist self-assessment.
Right.
But
I
I
guess
guess
it
it
falls
is,
into that
yeah.
category. When you are in university and you're doing like
Summative self-assessment.
yeah, and you're highlighting where you fall, what do you think of that?
I personally like it, but then when a prof doesn't necessarily agree with me on where I think I fall, I'm like,
How do you know?
okay,
Like
let's
the
talk
profs
about
know
this.
better.
No. I'm just saying like, when we're talking about self-assessment, if I'm assessing myself, how is it wrong?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, I've gotten self-assessment things back where the prof's been like, actually, you fall into this category. And it's like, awesome. Comment how or talk to me how. Like, I want to know so I can get to where I think I am or hope to be. Whereas I definitely think when you're doing that, like, grading scale or whatever, and you put yourself at a 5 and the prof obviously puts you at a 2 or a 3, well then that's room for discussion. Whereas on a rubric, it's almost like, oh, there's enough evidence there for me to circle something, I don't need to explain it to you. And I didn't find that with this class, I don't find that with other classes in education. I find that more so like my arts classes and stuff like that.
Right.
What do you think of it? The summative part, not.
Well, I just find that anytime I've given myself a self-assessment, it's been pretty much translated directly into my grade. So if I gave myself an 85, it just goes in as an 85. So then I'm thinking, well, why don't I just give myself a 95? If you're just going to enter exactly what I put and you're not going to like critique it or give, change it.
So you see it as a way of free marks?
No, I just see it. I also just see it as a way as I know many students who are very like it says self-deprecate a lot.
I gave up self-doubt for Lent.
They think they're doing worse, or they think I know I could have done better. But it's like, yeah, but like you're comparing yourself to who? Like you know your very best, and you maybe, I didn't put an extra hour into that because I really needed to have a nap that day because I had a migraine. And then now all of a sudden you think you did terrible, or you think you could. And I started just like, no, I know the work that I'm doing compared to people I see working next to me, and I'm giving myself better. Like I'll mark myself, say here is where I think I did, and I'll give myself 5% more, even 10% more sometimes, because I just feel like I'm also a little self-doubty sometimes, or I feel guilty about not doing 120% on things, so I mark myself too low. So now I start marking myself just higher.
So you think it actually like shifted your thoughts on that then? Like doing this self-assessment for summative marks, it shifted you from feeling like you didn't put enough effort into it that no, I actually did, because you have to stop and think about it. Whereas like when you hand it in and you don't have to assess it for yourself, you're like, man, I could have spent one more hour on that and made it a little bit better. But now when you have to sit down and assess, you're like, no, I know I did my very best. So you almost, it sounds like you seem like you feel better about your assignments when you have self-assessment.
Well, I just feel that I see, well, to be frank, there's been a lot of male counterparts who I see mark themselves very high on things that I would never give myself that grade. And so at that point, I was like, you know what? He's got confidence that I just don't have when it comes to assessing myself. I'm going to try that. And I started just trying that, and it worked out for me. So then I was thinking, is it me just having self-doubt or just having too high of expectations for myself? I don't know. So I just been like easier on myself. I've been marking myself like a middle 20s white man. And it's going well. So I'm sticking to it.
Do you think that would translate into your students, like the same kind of philosophies?
I don't know.
It's interesting because it seems like it, like in my mind, it almost seems like it would do the opposite, because then you're sitting there like critiquing yourself, but maybe you're actually being more authentically. You're like, no, actually, I know I tried my best, so I deserve a higher mark because I tried and I did these things to what my understanding is.
I also just feel, especially in the arts, it's different maths and sciences because there's a yes and no. But I feel sometimes that you'll never get 100% in English, right? So if I can just put in, and I'll write myself an 8.5 out of 10 instead of a 7 that I felt like I should. Well, I know my teachers aren't like out to get me, but I know I'm never gonna get 100%. I know it's like they're just taking marks off where they get the opportunity. Right? And I feel like especially in our English classes, it's really vague. Like, oh, you didn't quite hit this 5 on the rubric. Well, how did I not? Like, right. I guess that's up to you. So when it comes to be up to me, I'm going to give myself back those marks. Yeah, as much as I can.
I agree with that. That's where I was kind of getting with like when profs kind of disagree with your own self-assessment. I like how this class is formatted where my self-assessment contributes, but it's not kind of tore apart. Like, I get an assessment from the professor, I do one, and a peer does one. I can combine that, and through assessment, holistic assessment, I as a learner grow. And I think it's a lot different than when I hand something into, for example, a history prof, and I just like fingers crossed, hope I do well, and I get that 85, 90 back, and I'm like, yeah! Or I get that like 75, 80, and I'm like, well, I could have put another 2 more hours in. What can you do? Like, that's kind of where I'm at with self-assessment. So I wonder if students would feel like that too, where like I'm actually learning more about myself as a learner. And I don't know.
But are you? If I was to hand you a self-assessment right now on this conversation, are you like, oh, not another one? Or are you like, oh, yes.
Well, I think that it comes with time. So it's like I'll do that self-assessment right now. And then once I've processed the teacher's mark, my peer's mark, my feedback from all 3 of us, I look at the assignment again. Obviously, I'm going to learn more or appreciate that assessment more.
Right.
And I'm actually a little mad at myself, probably that whole self-doubt thing. But for this class in particular, because I haven't had to do it where it's worth anything before, but for this class in particular, my self-assessment was 10% lower than my grade from both my peer assessment and from the professor's assessment.
Exactly. So that's going to pull your mark down.
And
that
it pulled my
drives me
mark
nuts.
down. And I'm mad at myself because I'm doing really well in this class. And I was like, well,
Give her a better mark.
well, shucks. Why did I rate myself so low when obviously I did it well? Wow. So yeah.
It's to
But
me
if I
it's
do-
too personal.
Yeah.
It's too self-judgmental. But I
I'm
don't know.
Yeah, I know that's something. That's a personal. That's a different TED talk. So
It's a different conversation.
That's a
but
different conversation.
To me, it's touchy. For
But
sure.
yeah, it is a little touchy, but I think it is nice to give you some of your own. But yeah, if you have a student who's more self-doubt,
Yeah.
and now I have a mark that's 10% lower than what everyone else gave me, and it brings that mark down.
But
But 10% is a lot. Like, it's not like 1 or 2% you're
Yeah.
off. It's like, okay, well, shit.
So you have someone
Shucks.
like you who gives too low. You have someone like me who's too high. So how do we value this?
Where do we
Like,
find Goldilocks?
And I think that's going back to like the why are, and I guess this is part of my own philosophy towards assessment, but like an evaluation, but why are we giving these grades and smacking numbers to things when learning, like, who said that knowledge and learning is supposed to be on a scale of 100? And I look at like other non-Western societies who are able to communicate their learning and communicate their knowledge and learn from people and not necessarily look at like, oh, I got a 95 and you got a 50. Like, it's more so like, hey, bud, maybe I can help you with this and you can help me with something else and we'll grow as learners together.
So
Well, I think it's like if you think about your major and minor courses, I'm assuming you had finals in them in your first year. Can you remember anything from those classes?
no, I was at Hannah's class today, and they're learning pre-Confederation or pre-contact, to Confederation, and she had the timeline on the board, and I was like, I know I aced that test, but I don't remember.
Yeah, so that's my problem with standardized testing
Yeah.
and finals and cramming. I'm a master crammer.
Yeah.
I final really well. Does that make sense? Final.
Mhm.
You know what
I
I'm
don't
talking
in
about.
English, but I do in the other, like, histories where it's repeat, like
Right.
memorize.
And I'm sitting there right before the test, like just, and then honestly, hours after that test, gone.
So it was worthless.
It was
well,
absolutely worthless. Lots of my classes. I don't know why I bothered.
But, and
Back
that's,
to-
no,
Well,
you go
I
ahead.
bother for the credits, but it's a lot of money to pay to not know anything.
Right.
yeah. I guess back to your point, the one thing that I noticed when I was thinking about this is that in this class it never came up about switching to pass-fail. Like, our 300 class is pass-fail, 350 is pass-fail, and for assessment, the pass-fail idea, I know, but you're right, like, why did we decide that? And then the pass-fail thing, I know my first one, I had kind of an issue with it, because I was like, no, like, I work hard for decent grades, and I don't like that it's not a grade attached to it. And my friend who's a teacher is like, yeah, but if you're a surgeon, you're not a 75% surgeon. You're either a surgeon or you're not.
Yeah.
So either you can do it or you can't. So sometimes grades are just hindrances. So that we don't have to talk about it too much, but just because of assessment, pass-fail, like, it's an interesting concept, but we're so used to it, and so much like university acceptance, lots of things is set up on this number scale.
Well, I think we're rooted in that
Yeah,
as like
it's so-
traditional learners, especially you and I coming out of an older system, but also even
Mature system.
we're just used to that, and that's what we've grown up with. That's what we're taught to know, taught to regurgitate, taught to just test well.
Mm-hmm.
And even going back to my pre-internship experience with this exam, where I had to have matching multiple choice essay questions and short answer, I felt like everyone did way better on the matching and multiple choice. Like there were students who didn't even write the essay or had horrible short answer questions, which I thought that that's what I needed to have to make sure that I was making sure everyone knew and made connections, but they were getting 19 out of 19 on their multiple choice and then bombing everything else. So I'm like, well, I'm happy that I used half traditional, half kind of more modern styles of assessment, even though it was still an exam, because I guess it's not really modern, but giving them the options to write back on opinions and how they feel about things, but that for the most part was a total just downhill slide as soon as it got to that point, right?
Is it just because there's a shift though and people haven't like learned it yet? Because even in our own classes when we had the inquiry projects and we get such vague outlines, everyone's like, but what do we do? And they're like, it's an inquiry project. And you're like, inquire about what?
Right.
This book. Or it doesn't have to be this book. You're like, oh, okay, so like inquire? Like about what? Like I feel like when we get to, we're not used to it.
Yeah.
And so you kind of are grasping. So like the assessment piece almost, it makes sense that we make that assessment piece something you can tie down. Because when you make it so loose, like here's an inquiry project in English class, so we don't know what to do. You look at the rubric, it's like 1 to 5. You're like, okay, well, I want a 5, so
Yeah. Well,
guess I'll do something.
it made me really question, like, I know we're trying to get away from these traditional styles, but then we're still, like, we need to get away from it way younger.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in kindergarten, grade 1, like elementary, like, get away from it then. Like,
Start project-based, inquiry-based, like early.
yeah, because these traditional methods, if we're continuing to teach traditional methods, I think for us coming into high schools now and saying, you know what, to hell with traditional methods, we're going to have trouble with that, because I think our students are still really rooted in that, whether we like to admit it or not, and they do perform better on multiple choice and matching, which I clearly saw this week. And it's not like I taught one thing better than the next. I feel like I put way more effort, right, as far as my teaching philosophy and just my lesson planning, way more into like discussion and connections from life to text and connections from making of mice and men, like how do I make this modern, and bringing in all these aspects and different and modern stories and from local people, and they were not making connections to it, even though we talked about it for like 15-20 minutes a day, right? They still couldn't put it on paper. And
But if you were to ask them true or false about what the connections were, like,
no problem.
yeah, Robert Latimer was convicted of this, true or false, and they'd be like, oh yeah, we know this. But when you ask people to have a conversation about it, they don't know how.
Right, and I'm like, is it like a writing issue? Is it a thought issue? Was it a teaching issue? There's just so many issues, and it's hard to find.
But have you heard of like Genius Hour that they're coming?
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. Awesome. Fantastic.
I think I
Do you
wrote
want to
about
speak
it.
to that?
I'm
No,
writing
go
this
ahead. I
down.
think I wrote about it in, I can't remember. Genius Hour came up in something I've been doing for finals.
So Genius Hour is being introduced into elementary schools. I think you actually talked about it in your video, but
Yeah, I think it's in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it kind of deals with that. What's his name? Christopher Erin or whatever. That C's guy, Edmund. Do you remember?
So.
Do you
I think
remember?
so. But
The 7 C's.
Genius Hour kind of is like an inquiry-based project for students to talk about what they're passionate about. And I had a university-level Genius Hour thing just the other day where it was like 15 minutes based on my research, based on what I'm passionate about. And these students are starting it at like kindergarten level. And I saw it at an elementary school that I was placed at.
Me too.
Yeah, and it was awesome. It was like this one kid who loved basketball. We're not in basketball, like we're not in phys ed, but he talked about basketball, and we went to the gym and he talked about it, and he brought in like physics of basketball, and he brought in like how basketball is like represented in pop culture, and like all this sort of like all this stuff. and he was the genius, even though in the class, if you were to give that student a test, he probably wouldn't be considered the genius in grade standards.
Interesting.
So
like
that's, I think we're starting to progress to something that's more student driven. We're not there yet, but of course education hasn't changed for the last couple hundred years anyway. So
We're not in a hurry. It's not going to change completely overnight.
So in regards to that whole genius hour and talking about that, I definitely think it leads into kind of what we were talking about before with assessment, and that whole peer assessment thing. Like, you're presenting in front of your peers about something that you care about, and I think that that's a good way for students to learn how to assess each other and themselves and whatnot. So start them out young.
Right. What are your thoughts on peer assessment?
Because you don't have any yet.
Well, I'm just,
No,
I have
I'm just
multiple
kidding.
thoughts.
I remember when I was doing my own reflection, there was the one thing that I forget which, I can't find the name right now, but one of the slides towards the end talks about peer assessment, but you have to teach it, right? And then so it has like the sandwich ideas, and there was a lot of, do you remember which one I'm talking about? And it's like, okay, so you give them something positive, here's something that like confuses me. It gives them like the template to teach them how, but you still have to outline it.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how seriously people take it. Like, I think you can teach it, but I think, say, us three might peer assess well for one another, but it's someone who, what if you get someone who doesn't care, or maybe doesn't like you and gives you a lower mark? I don't know. I don't know. Peer assessment is interesting. I think you have to teach it well, and I think that comes with the whole classroom. Like, it has to have that classroom. What's the word I'm looking for? Like, culture. The classroom culture has to be like, okay, we're gonna have peer assessment. Is it gonna be formative or summative? That's a tough question too. Like, I don't know. I think peer assessment's good because I think the whole idea of putting it into their own language is really beneficial. Because sometimes teachers have teacher talk and students understand one another better, but when it comes down to it being summative and affecting the grades, I don't know, because you have so many different people and different personalities assessing so many other people, it'd be inconsistent, maybe.
So maybe go into like a peer feedback / evaluation instead of a peer assessment for summative assessment, I guess.
Someone to do your checklist for you.
Right.
Does this person check all these boxes?
Yeah.
Genius hour, were they passionate about what they talked about? Did I learn something? What did I learn that was new? What do I still have a question about? Yeah, peer assessment, because again, you want the students need more control of their own learning. But as for peer assessment with summative, I don't know. That's a tricky one. Just because there's like, I could get you and you like me and you give me a 90, or I could get you and we fighting and you're like, yeah, you get 75. Like, it's, I don't know how you
I have
negotiate.
multiple feelings on this.
Yeah, okay, let's
I'll
hear them
begin my
because I
list.
don't have an answer.
So
I just rambled.
yeah, well, I agree. Summative or formative. I think it's better as just more feedback than an actual grade. I think that people mark kind of harsh. They'll mark on their own expectations. So I think that it should be done this way. I would give it this much effort, but you don't. Therefore, I'm grading you on my effort, not your own.
Yeah.
Like my own standards, I should say, not effort. Also, if you're my buddy, I'm going to give you a better mark, probably.
Yeah.
Right? So is this effective? I also don't like, in that one class a couple days ago, we had to peer assess, and I was given like a chart like this, like success criteria, and I'm taking notes the whole time, and I'm not effectively listening, and I can't, because she had 5 minutes to present, and I have to fill out 10 things, and I can't leave until it's done. And the next person starts, so I'm like, okay, well, I need to get this done while she's presenting, otherwise I'm not going to remember, because I have to watch 10 people do this. So I'm frantically writing. I'm not giving her a fair chance. I'm not listening to her. I'm not learning anything. So I don't like that.
Especially if it's like the 5th one of the day. You're like, okay. Like, if it's all the same, like, if I know Genius Hour is like one a day, but say there is some like 5-minute presentations for everyone that day and you're expected. Yeah, I think you want the students to be doing something, but maybe it is more
A check mark.
you check mark so they can still pay attention, and they're also paying enough attention where they're not distracted.
Or a scale.
Yeah, is that where the grading scale comes in? Yeah.
Scale.
The pie.
I have that marked down here, the pie chart, but add that for group work, but
Yeah, from Carmen's class.
Yeah.
Like in the whole, I guess that's back to self-assessment though. The pie chart is more self-assessment, and the idea is
and marking your peers.
Oh,
and
yeah,
your
peer.
It can be used as peer.
and for like some peer assessments, it's like, would your peers want to work with you again? So it's still
Mm-hmm.
a self-assessment, but it's also a peer. Yeah.
Well, I like that because we always, well, I shouldn't say that, but I know in Carmen's class they're talking about how people will always kind of talk trash about their group members. Not always, but often are like, oh, I did way more work than so and so. There's kind of that tendency. So if you make the pie chart, like I think so and so, did half. This person did an eighth. And go on from there.
Mhm.
I'm not a math person, so I don't want to finish that. Finish those fractions up. So leave it at that.
Well,
but I think that's an interesting way to do it. And you can kind of compare the pies, see if they're accurate amongst the group members. And I don't know. I'm not sure how important that is.
I was going to bust into a philosopher, but I'll save that for another time. In his paradox of busting things down into. Never mind. It's not important. I'll send you a TED Talk.
Sure. One thing I did think was cool that I've learned in this class and kind of through our class with Val is she gives us feedback on our feedback. So
Right.
I write a peer assessment on a presentation. I have to hand that in to her. I have no idea how it gets graded or if it even goes towards them, but she'll critique me on my feedback. Like, really? You gave him 100% on this? Like, should I be calling the publishers? That was her feedback on one of mine. Because I was like, this is an amazing presentation. She's like, you either need to review the criteria or I need to call the publisher because this is not 100%. Or was it? Like, she kind of makes you think about it. Like, maybe I didn't do this correctly.
Yeah, because she doesn't directly.
She's kind of sarcastic, so it was funny. But, yeah.
But I think
that would
that's-
have been cool for this class to get back.
Yeah.
Well, she had enough work, I get that, but like, but you're right. Yeah, that was really helpful in Val's class. So if we are filling this out as we're watching our peers, getting feedback on your feedback, because life is about helping people too, and you want to learn how to give people feedback that's going to move them forward.
It taught me how to give proper feedback.
Yeah. Maybe that would be more valuable on if you do a peer assessment. As a teacher, you assess the assessment in that kind of way. Hey, maybe the same idea.
And even on another gal that I evaluated, I did not even, I gave her probably like a 7 out of 10. But in my comments, I was kind in my comments, like, did this really well, would love to see a little more information about this. Or I think I could feel she was more passionate about this topic, but didn't really get into it. And she wrote me back saying, this is awesome because you're critiquing really kindly, and that's what people need. Like, you need to kind of stimulate, not just like,
And that gets back to that
you missed
sandwich
this,
idea.
the sandwich idea.
I worry about this because I can tell there's passion, but it didn't shine through the way that the passion overall did. It's something like that. Like, the sandwich, some nice stuff, a little bit of confusion, and what you would have liked to see more of, or what was interesting.
Which brings me to another point, though.
And she's just dying to say something.
You go first.
No. I was just gonna say, like, in peer assessment, today we did something in one of my ed classes, and it was called 2 Stars, 1 Wish, and it was like a feedback based on comments. So I wasn't giving someone a 75% or a 95%. I was giving someone comments, and the prof took in those comments from everyone, and that helped guide her with giving out marks or with giving out grades to students. And so, like, that was awesome. Like, 2 stars. Like, what did they do great? What did you enjoy? What parts of the rubric, what parts of the assignment did they do well? And one thing you wish that they would have done better, either in their presentation of it, in what they were telling, or in what the success criteria said to do.
Right. I like that. And it's like 2 stars and 1 wish, it kind of goes together.
Right.
Wish on a star. One thing I was just thinking of was a student was talking about evaluating or assessing a project in their pre-internship and gave them a little too much bread on their compliment sandwich.
Oh, yeah.
And so the student was like, if there was this much good stuff about it, why did you give me this mark? right? So also being careful that your mark that you're assigning, if that's what you're into, is kind of matching the sandwich quality. I guess.
Yeah,
right?
I guess if you give a lower mark and you kind of feel bad, so you're like, okay, well, it's a 70, but here's the stuff you did really well.
Yeah.
Great content.
Yeah.
MLA formatting, bang on.
It
Everything
wasn't
else
on
is
the
garbage.
success criteria, but well done.
Right.
And I think that's too like part of personalities of students, like knowing your students and like making that good atmosphere for assessment and for learning through assessment. Like I think about sport teams and like how are you going to get better without getting that critique or getting that feedback?
Yeah, you're not going to get better if everything's like...
Right.
If I'm like, Sarah, your sweeping is a little slow. You're like, oh, okay, right?
Right. And like, if my teammate says that to me, obviously she has my best interest in mind. Therefore, if my peer says that to me, obviously she or he or they have my best interest in mind. So I don't necessarily think that peer assessment is based on like peers giving grades or lessening the teacher's load or that sort of thing. I think it's more so like we're growing together as learners for learning, and through our assessment we will become fuller and more whole learners.
It's true.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. So I guess for the, like, I still have a lot of questions about assessment, but I actually do think that this helped me a lot, think about more things. And over the summer, I wrote in Bettina's, oh, I guess you have Bettina too. So that like, what are you going to read for your educational or your professional growth? Education. So I want to read that Edmonds for white folks who teach in the hood and all y'all too.
Yeah.
It's on my, that's what I wrote about. I totally want to read about that, and I think that will help cement more of my assessment philosophies and things like that. So that's one of my summer build your stack to throw in all our classes in one sentence. Yeah, I think that one will help a lot with my, and thanks for doing this. You can cut that out if you want.
Thank you. I think for me, what I've gotten like from this is the whole authentic assessment. Knowing your students, knowing where you want to be as an assessor, if that's a word.
It is now.
As an assessor, or those who do assessments. And I definitely think that grading the work and grading the person goes hand in hand. And as a teacher, I just want to know that my students are getting the most of their assessments.
Yeah, that's great. I agree with both of you. I also want to read that book. I think this class really brought out my critical thinking of assessment. Prior to this class, I wasn't really feeling strongly one way or the other. I just didn't really know how to feel at all. So coming into this class with, maybe not leaving with cemented ideas on this is how I'm going to do things from now on, but really looking into my lesson plans and critically thinking about everything. Like, what do I want the student to know when he walks out of this classroom today? And really focusing on that and kind of more backwards by design, maybe not necessarily lesson planning, but making the assessment the priority over the content, especially while I'm lesson planning. So
I feel like the assessment, like if you have a good assessment idea, the path there almost like paves itself.
Yes.
Absolutely. It just makes it so much easier.
Yeah.
I agree. And that's why it's stage 2 on your backwards by design, I guess.
Yeah. It makes sense.
And not just necessarily outcome focused either, but finding relevant ways to get there and ways that are going to captivate people, captivate your students. Sticking with the times and making your content interesting. And I think that focusing on your assessment and your outcome together, but specifically assessment, can really help you nail that down.
I think including the students too, more so, whereas before they were kind of blind to their assessment, they were just that it was just what it was.
Yeah.
And now they're being asked to contribute to it more and more, and I think trying that out a few times might be worth it for sure, just to have them involved in that piece as well.
And we will live and learn and figure this out.
And we will cry a lot.
See y'all.
Probably, yeah.
Bye-bye.